Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Humans in 5.
One of the things we love about science is not only its discovery of new ideas, but also how it updates ideas from year to year. It may sound tedious, but carefully going over the work that other researchers have done before helps us find ways to further explore old questions and even find new ones.
There are a number of factors that influence how researchers can improve on the work of their elders. Technologies improve, which allow us to investigate certain questions in more detail. For example, a new method of annotating certain segments of DNA was one of the major outcomes of the Human Genome Project, speeding up other studies on DNA from that point onwards. With increasing numbers of students pursuing careers in research, there are also more bright minds to think up important and interesting questions for scientific study.
Time and funding can also influence whether certain studies are re-examined. Funding can sometimes only stretch so far, which impacts on the type of methods you can use. For example, you might want to use medical imaging to look at the inside of a human bone, but your funding can only accommodate techniques that give you a surface image of the bone. Just like it is for everyone, time can be the enemy of the scientist too. With researchers taking on multiple roles in universities, the time needed for bigger, better studies is not always available.
However, a recent study completed by a team of researchers from the University of Glasgow, the University of Stirling, and the University of Bath gives a great example of the power of improved methods in investigating an old question. Benedict Jones and his colleagues were investigating the effects of hormones on how women perceive attractiveness.
The basis of this study isn't a new one. Previous work found that women were more likely to find specific male facial features more attractive when they were ovulating. These studies found that ovulating women would find men with broad noses, strong brows, and square jaws more attractive because these features are indicative of a strong immune system, making these men a good candidate for a mate.
But these studies were not ideal when it comes to their methods. Firstly, they often had small sample sizes. An average of 40 women isn't very representative. Secondly, women's hormonal status was self-reported, which isn't ideal as not everyone can remember the exact details of their last period. Thirdly, the women in these studies were only tested twice. This doesn't really capture the complexity of hormonal changes.
So Jones and his colleagues increased their sample size to 584 women and had them rate the attractiveness of male features in a minimum of 2 blocks, once a week for 5 weeks. The authors also collected saliva samples from each woman to measure their hormonal status at each testing session, meaning that they could track how changing hormonal levels affected women's preferences for male facial features. They also collected detailed information on any hormonal contraceptives women were taking to better capture how additional hormones affected women's choice in men's faces.
Their results blew those old ideas of fertile women wanting thick-jawed men right out of the water. They found that hormonal status and oral contraceptive use had no effect on whether women found masculine features attractive. They even repeated the analysis, focusing on hormone levels and male facial features, on the instruction of a reviewer, and they got the same results. Now that makes for some solid conclusions. It also suggests that attraction between men and women is much more complex than just variation in hormone levels.
This study shows that there is real value in rethinking old studies and finding ways to improve how they address complex questions like attraction. This doesn't mean that previous studies are all useless. It's quite the opposite. A good understanding of what's come before helps us expand our questions into new and exciting places.
We hope today's episode gets you thinking about new ways to approach age-old questions, and we'll see you next time on Humans in 5.
And don't forget to subscribe.